Hey, so in this video, we are going to talk about Robert Browning. Now, when we talk about Robert Browning, the first word that comes to your mind should be dramatic monologue. His poems were characterized by monologues, and the situations were such that they would always involve thrill, mystery, love affair. The main character or the main protagonist would always have the characteristics of a psychopath. So, love affair, these kind of things were very common in his poetry and were very different from the usual trends of his time and tide. His contemporaries did not write something similar to this. So he was quite different from what his contemporaries were writing. So Robert Browning was born in Walworth, in the parish of Camberwell, Surrey. He is an English poet and playwright whose mastery of the dramatic monologue made him one of the foremost Victorian poets. Browning's early career began promisingly but collapsed. The long poem Pauline and Paracelsus received some acclaim, but in 1840 the difficult Sordello, which was seen as willfully obscure, brought his poetry into disrepute. In 1846, Browning married the older poet Elizabeth Barrett, who was among his admirers, I would say, limited admirers. Elizabeth Browning was herself a very renowned poet of that time. So let's talk about his work. First, we have Sordello, which was written in 1840. It is a narrative poem, and it consists of a fictionalized version of the life of Sordello de Goethe, a 13th century Lombard troubadour depicted in Canto 6 of Dante Alighieri's Purgatorio. The setting is of northern Italy in the 1220s, dominated by the struggle between guilds, that is, partisans of the Pope, and Ghibellians, that is, partisans of the Holy Roman Emperor. Sordello is a Ghibellian, like his lord Eccelin II de Romano and the soldier Truello. Next we have Pippa Passes 1841, a verse drama. It is a verse drama. It was published in 1841 as the first volume of his Bells and Pomegranate series. The author describes the work as the first of a series of dramatic pieces. A young, blameless, silk-winding girl is wandering innocently through the environs of Azole, in her mind attributing kindness and virtue to the people she passes. She sings as she goes, her song influencing others to act for good. The famous lines from this are, "God's in his heaven, all's right with the world." And this is very oft quoted also, that if God is in heaven, that means everything is going fine around. If he is going to come to any other place, then obviously there is something wrong with the world. Next we have Porphyro's Lover, 1842. In this, Browning, it was the first among the dramatic monologues that Browning wrote. And in this poem, he examines an abnormal psychology, as I said, psychopaths. In this poem, a man strangles his lover, Porphyria, with her hair, and all her hair in one long yellow string I wound 3 times her little throat round, and strangled her. So you see the kind of trends the time was setting up. Next we have the Soliloquy of the Spanish Cloister, 1842. A soliloquy written by Robert Browning. It was first published in his collection of dramatic lyrics, 1842. It is written in the voice of an unnamed Spanish monk. The poem consists of 9 8-line stanzas and is written in trochaic tetrameter. The plot of the poem centers around the speaker's hatred for Brother Lawrence, a fellow monk in the cloister. Next we have My Last Duchess, 1842. It is an example of another dramatic monologue. It first appeared in 1842 in Browning's dramatic lyrics. The poem is written in 28 rhyming couplets of iambic pentameter. The poem is preceded by Ferrar. The poem is a representation of male and female relationships and their contrasting powers or lack thereof. Women in the past and even in some cultures today are considered pieces of property. Within many religions and cultures, the male bestows the position of dominance and control over women, which constricts their right of free will. The poem is set in the Italian Renaissance. Next is How They Brought the Good News from Ghent to Aix, 1845. In this poem, one of the volumes of dramatic romances, is a first poem narrative told in breathless galloping meter by one of the 3 riders. The midnight errand is urgent, the news which alone could save X from her fate. But the nature of that good news is never revealed. So you will see that the poets had started giving the tone to the writing matter also. You will find many other similar terms, many other trends which were coming into poetry and very greatly explored in the modern era, that the structure and the words which were used in poems, they defined the tone and the theme of the poem. Next we have The Lost Leader, 1845. In this poem, he berates William Wordsworth, for Browning considered his desertion of the liberal cause and his lapse from his high idealism. Just for a handful of silver he left us, just for a riband to stick in his coat. Now, Wordsworth was a poet who talked about the rural beauty. But if you read his poems, many of the times he has used a language or a life which was quite urbane. And And so there were many contrasts in his writings and his daily life practices, which had been criticized by many earlier poets also, and Browning is, of course, one of them. Home Thoughts, the next work of Browning from abroad, 1845. It was written in 1845 while Browning was on a visit to northern Italy and was first published in his dramatic romances and lyrics. Next is Childe Roland to the Dark Tower came 1852. It is published in Men and Women. The title it is from the last words of a poem from William Shakespeare's play King Lear. In this, Browning explores the journey to the Dark Tower in 34 6-line stanzas with the rhyme scheme of A B B A B A A B with and iambic pentameter. The poem opens with Roland's speculations about the truthfulness of the man who gives him directions to the Dark Tower. Fra Lippo-Lippi, 1855. Dramatic monologue is again there. Throughout this poem, Browning depicts a 15th century real-life painter, Filippo Lippi. The poem asks the question whether art should be true to life or an idealized image of life. The poem is written in blank verse and non-rhyming iambic pentameter. A secondary theme of the dramatic monologue is the church's influence on art. Although Fra Lippo-Lippi paints real-life pictures, it is the church that requires him to redo much of it, instructing him to paint the soul, not the flesh. Paint the soul, never mind the legs and the arms. So again, the debate between depiction of what the church says and how life in reality exists is again there, and it will be greatly questioned in the modern era after the World War scenarios. Next we have Andrea del Sarto, also called the Faultless Painter, 1855. It is a dramatic monologue, a form of poetry which he was very famous for, and it is about the Italian poet Andrea del Sarto. The poem is a blank verse and mainly uses iambic pentameters. Browning based Del Sarto's love for his wife Lucrezia on his own love for his wife. Andrea del Sarto explores broad themes such as if all human interactions are governed by aesthetic or exchange value, failure, whether one's life is a possession, and morality in general. Rabbi Ben Ezra, a poem by Robert Browning, which is about Abraham ibn Ezra, 1092 to 1167, one of the great poets, mathematicians, and scholars of the 12th century. This person, that is Ibrahim, wrote about grammar, astronomy, and astrolabe, etc. The poem begins with "Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be." Then we have The Last Ride Together, again a dramatic monologue based on the lovers' last ride, because now they are going to be separated. The rupture of a rejected lover is the one more last ride which he asks for and obtains, discovers for him is all sufficing glory of the love itself. So that's all about Robert Browning. As you can see, he mostly talks about the love affairs, mostly unrequited and with